They called me a useless old woman who couldn't work a computer, so they used my name to hide their fraud. They had no idea I was secretly collecting every email and recording that would be the evidence to send them to prison. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. The scent of rosemary and roasted chicken should have been comforting. It was the scent of decades of Sunday dinners, a weekly ritual I had upheld long after my husband, Richard, had passed. It was meant to be a tether, a way of holding our small family together. But lately, the scent had become a clawing perfume masking the rot of resentment that had seeped into the foundations of our lives. Today was no different. The table was set with my best china, the plates Richard and I had bought on our honeymoon. Each one a small, tangible memory. My daughter, Clara, sat opposite me, picking at her green beans with the nervous energy of a bird trapped in a cage. At 42, she was a bundle of anxieties, her face etched with the stress of a demanding career and a more demanding husband. That husband, David, sat at the head of the table in Richard's chair. He had claimed it so naturally after Richard's death, a small symbolic coup that I had been too grief-stricken to contest. Now he filled it with an air of proprietary ownership, carving the chicken with a flourish that was more performance than skill. My grandson, Leo, was a quiet island in the middle of the simmering tension. At 16, he was more comfortable in the digital world than in this one, his thumbs often twitching, as if holding an invisible controller. But he was here, and he always met my eyes with a warmth that was painfully absent in his parents' gazes. I cleared my throat, the silence having stretched on for too long. I was reading the most interesting article online today, I began, my voice a little reedy. It was about these new email scams. They're so clever, you see. They pretend to be from your bank. Before I could finish, a sound erupted from the head of the table. It wasn't a chuckle, it was a laugh. A full-throated, booming laugh that was so loud it made the cutlery vibrate. It was a laugh of pure, unadulterated condescension. David leaned back in Richard's chair, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye with the back of his hand. "Oh, Agnes," he said, shaking his head, as if I were a particularly amusing toddler. "Don't you worry your little head about email scams. You're perfectly safe." He looked from Clara to Leo, drawing them into his cruel little joke. "She can't even work a computer." The words landed in the center of the table like a lead weight. The air, already thin, was sucked from the room. I saw Leo flinch, his eyes darting from his father to me, a flicker of anger in their depths. Clara just stared at her plate, a flush of red creeping up her neck. She was embarrassed, not for her husband's cruelty, but for my perceived incompetence. For me. The insult itself wasn't the point. In a way, he was right. My life had been one of ledgers and adding machines, of fountain pens and crisp, clean paper. I was a bookkeeper by trade, retired now for almost a decade. My world had been one of tangible numbers, of columns that had to balance, of a logic that was as solid and dependable as the ground beneath my feet. The digital world, with its clouds and streams and ethereal data, felt like a foreign country with a language I didn't speak, but the sting came from the dismissal. In that one laugh, David had erased my entire life. He had reduced a woman who had run the books for a thriving company for 40 years, who had managed a household, raised a daughter, and navigated the complex finances of widowhood to a single, pathetic caricature. The useless old woman. I didn't say anything. I didn't cry or shout. I felt a lifetime of holding my tongue, of keeping a dignified peace, settle over me like a familiar shawl. But beneath the calm exterior, something inside me shifted. It was not a loud, dramatic snap, but a quiet, cold, and final click, like the tumbler of a lock falling into place. I looked at my son-in-law, his face still alight with amusement at my expense. I looked at my daughter, who refused to meet my gaze. They saw me as a relic, a harmless, technologically illiterate ghost haunting the corners of their modern lives. A ghost? The word echoed in my mind, and in that moment, I decided that if a ghost was what they wanted, then a ghost was precisely what they would get. I picked up my fork and took a bite of chicken. It tasted like ash. I smiled, a small, serene smile that didn't reach my eyes. "You're probably right, David," I said softly. "It's all a bit too complicated for me." The day after that disastrous Sunday dinner, I sat in my quiet living room. The insult hadn't faded. It had crystallized. My eyes fell on the gift they had given me last Christmas. It was a sleek silver tablet, still in its pristine white box on the bookshelf. At the time, I'd seen it as a thoughtless, generic gift. Now I saw not an insult, but a weapon, a tool, a key to the very world they believed I was locked out of. But I couldn't use it on my own. I needed a guide. I picked up my old landline phone, the familiar weight of the receiver a small comfort, and dialed. He answered on the second ring. "Hey, Grandma." "Leo, dear," I said, my voice steady. "I hope I'm not interrupting. I was wondering if you might be able to help me with something." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sure, Grandma. What's up?" I took a breath, the words feeling foreign but necessary. "It's about that tablet you all gave me for Christmas. I think it's high time I learned how to use the thing." The silence was replaced by a sound of genuine pleasure. "Really? That's awesome, Grandma. Of course I can help. I'd love to." His enthusiasm was a balm on my wounded pride. He didn't sound surprised or condescending. He sounded happy. We arranged for him to come over the following afternoon after school, under the guise of helping me with some gardening, a plausible excuse that wouldn't raise any suspicions with his parents. The next day, Leo arrived. We spent a token 20 minutes in the garden, pulling a few weeds from the rose bushes, before retreating to the kitchen. He pulled the tablet from its box, its screen a perfect black mirror. He handled it with an innate confidence, his fingers gliding across the surface as he powered it on. "Okay," he said, pulling up a chair next to me at the kitchen table. "Let's start with the basics. This is how you unlock it. This is the home screen. These little pictures are called apps." His patience was extraordinary. He spoke clearly, without a hint of the frustration his parents so often displayed. He showed me how to connect to my Wi-Fi, a process that felt like performing a magic spell. He walked me through the settings, explaining what each function did in simple, understandable terms. He was a natural teacher, and I, it turned out, was a surprisingly eager student. My past as a bookkeeper, the very thing David had unknowingly mocked, became my greatest asset. My mind, trained for decades to follow procedures, to organize information, and to spot inconsistencies, latched onto the logic of the digital world. "This operating system," I murmured, tapping an icon, "is just another kind of ledger, isn't it? A series of inputs and outputs that have to balance." Leo looked at me, impressed. "That's exactly what it is, Grandma. A super fast ledger. I never thought of it that way." We set up my first email account. Leo suggested a simple, straightforward address. I watched his fingers fly across the virtual keyboard, and then it was my turn. My own fingers felt clumsy and slow, but I pecked out my name, my password, my first ever digital identity. "There," he said with a proud smile as the welcome email from the service provider appeared in my inbox. "You're officially online, Grandma." That first lesson lasted for 2 hours. By the time Leo left, my head was swimming with new information, but I also felt a thrill, a sense of empowerment I hadn't felt in years. I'd opened a door to a world I had been told was not for me. That night, long after the house was dark, I sat at the kitchen table, the tablet glowing in front of me. I practiced unlocking the screen. I opened and closed the email app. I typed out a short message to my new address and watched in amazement as it appeared in my own inbox a moment later. It was a small, simple act, but it felt monumental. David had laughed because he thought I was powerless, locked in an analog past. He had no idea that I had just been handed the key to his digital world, and I was a very, very fast learner. Our lessons became a weekly ritual. Gardening became our code word. Within a month, I was no longer fumbling. I could browse the news, watch tutorials on heirloom tomatoes, and manage my email with an efficiency that would have stunned my family. The student was ready, and I had a feeling the test was coming. It was another Sunday, not a full dinner this time, but a casual afternoon visit. Clara and David arrived looking harried, their faces etched with the familiar lines of corporate stress. They brought a store-bought cake that sat on the counter like a peace offering for a war they didn't know we were fighting. They sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I took my secret lessons. "Mom," Clara began, her voice carefully casual, "we were hoping you could do us a small favor." "It's a work thing." I poured them tea, my movements slow and deliberate. My expression was one of mild grandmotherly curiosity. "Oh, what is it, dear?" David took over, leaning forward with the smooth, practiced charm of a salesman closing a deal. "It's just a bit of boring corporate policy, Agnes. Nothing to worry your head about." That phrase again. Worry your head. My grip tightened on the teapot. "My company, our company," he corrected himself with a nod toward Clara, "has implemented a new data retention policy. It's a real headache. We have to create a separate archive for old client communications." He paused, letting the meaningless corporate jargon settle in the air, designed to sound both important and incomprehensible. "And for compliance reasons," he continued, "it has to be held by a third-party non-employee." He gave me a smile that was meant to be warm, but felt predatory. "We were thinking, since you're retired and have no connection to the firm, you would be the perfect person." "What would I have to do?" I asked, keeping my voice placid. "Absolutely nothing," David said, his voice bright. "That's the beauty of it. All we need to do is set up an email account in your name. We'll handle everything, of course. We'll manage the archive, all the technical stuff. Your name would just be on the account as a formality." Clara, who had been twisting the handle of her teacup, finally spoke. "It would really get David's boss off his back, Mom." Her voice was small, pleading. "It's just a name." It was a brilliant piece of manipulation. They were offering me a chance to be useful, the very role they had so publicly denied me. And they had chosen the perfect bait, an email account, the very thing David had laughed about. He was so utterly convinced of my incompetence that he believed he could hide his secrets in the very medium he had mocked me for not understanding. He was building my prison out of materials he didn't know I could turn into a key. I pretended to be hesitant, to be confused by the technical terms. "Oh, I don't know, David. It sounds very complicated. What if I do something wrong?" "You won't have to do a thing, Agnes," he said, his voice dripping with condescending reassurance. "That's the point. You won't even have to look at it. We just need your name." I let the silence stretch, enjoying the flicker of anxiety in his eyes. "Well," I said with a sigh, playing the part of the slightly bewildered but ultimately compliant mother. "If it really helps you and Clara, then, of course. What do I need to do?" The relief on their faces was palpable. David's charming smile returned, broader than ever. Clara's shoulders, which had been hunched up around her ears, visibly relaxed. They thought they had just secured the perfect hiding place. They had no idea they had just handed me the keys to their kingdom. The following Saturday, David arrived alone. "Clara's caught up at the office," he explained. He came armed with his sleek silver laptop and an air of performative patience, like a man stooping to explain a complex subject to a child. "All right, Agnes," he said, setting up his computer on my kitchen table. "Let's get this done. It won't take a minute." I sat beside him, playing my part. I peered at the screen with a look of wide-eyed confusion, my hands clasped in my lap. I was the very picture of technological ineptitude. David, completely buying the act, reveled in his role. "See? First we go to this website," he said, typing quickly. "And then we click this little button here that says Create Account. Simple, right?" He chose the email address himself, acroft.archive@email.com. It sounded official, boring, and utterly forgettable. "Now for the important part," he said, his voice dropping as if he were sharing a state secret. "The password. We need something secure, but something you don't need to remember, since I'll be the one using it." His fingers flew across the keyboard, his body angled so I couldn't see what he was typing. He was so confident in my ignorance that the idea I might know how to reset a password had never even crossed his mind. When he was done, he took a sticky note and a pen from his briefcase. He scribbled something on it and slid it across the table to me. "Here," he said, "this is the password for your records. Just put it somewhere safe." He added a chuckle. "Or don't. It doesn't really matter." I looked down at the note. He had written, "Useless old hag." The cruelty of it was breathtaking. It was a private joke, a final twist of the knife, a secret password that also served as a constant reminder of his contempt. He was so certain I would never see it, or if I did, that I wouldn't understand its significance. I felt a cold, hard knot of anger form in my stomach, but I kept my face a perfect mask of benign confusion. I folded the note carefully and tucked it into the pocket of my cardigan. "Thank you, David," I said, my voice sweet as honey. "That's very memorable." "It is, isn't it?" he said, completely missing the irony. He spent another few minutes showing me the empty inbox, the settings, the various folders he was creating. Invoices, client comms, Project Alpha, all designed to look like a legitimate, if boring, corporate archive. "And that's it," he announced, closing his laptop with a satisfied snap. "You are now the proud owner of an email account you never have to look at. See? Painless." He stood up, ready to leave. "Thanks again for this, Agnes. You're a real lifesaver." "Any time, dear," I said. "Anything for family." As I watched him walk out the door, my hand went to the sticky note in my pocket. He thought he had just created the perfect impenetrable cover for his crimes. He had built a fortress and named it after my weakness, decorating its walls with his contempt. He had no idea he had just handed the blueprints, the master key, and a written confession to the one person he should have feared the most. His visit didn't deter me. It fueled me. The sticky note became a talisman, a reminder of what was at stake. My weekly lessons with Leo took on a new urgency. I was no longer just a grandmother learning a new skill. I was a soldier preparing for battle. My request to Leo was simple, disguised in the language of grandmotherly caution. "Leo, dear," I said one afternoon, the tablet between us. "I was reading about those scams again, and it mentioned something about people stealing your passwords. It's all very frightening. Could you show me how to protect myself? How do all these passwords and accounts work, really?" Leo, ever the patient teacher, was happy to oblige. "That's a great question, Grandma. Account security is super important." He began to walk me through the architecture of the digital world. He showed me how to create strong, unique passwords, And more importantly, he showed me how they could be recovered. He guided me through the forgot password process on a dummy account he'd created for me to practice on. "See," he said, as a password reset link appeared in my primary email, the one he had helped me create, the one I controlled. As long as you control the main recovery email, you can get into almost anything linked to it. It's like having a master key. A master key. The phrase resonated deep within me. Our lessons grew more advanced. "I want to organize the old family photos I have in shoeboxes," I told him, feigning ignorance. "Is there a way to save them on this cloud I keep hearing about?" "Totally." Leo's eyes lit up. "Cloud storage is perfect for that. I can show you how to set up a Google Drive or a Dropbox. You can upload files, organize them into folders, and access them from anywhere." He showed me the process step by step: how to create folders, how to upload files, how to share them, or more importantly, how to keep them private and secure. My bookkeeper's mind, which loved order and categorization, took to it immediately. I saw not just a place for family photos, but a digital safe, a place to store evidence, meticulously organized and beyond anyone else's reach. I was learning a new language, and I was becoming fluent with astonishing speed. Leo, for his part, was simply proud of his grandmother. He thought he was helping me connect with family and friends. In reality, he was teaching me how to build a case, how to gather evidence, how to become a digital detective. "You're getting so good at this, Grandma," he laughed one afternoon as he showed me how to clear my browser history for privacy. "Pretty soon you'll be teaching me a thing or two." I smiled, a genuine warm smile. "I have a good teacher," I said, and I meant it. He couldn't see the cold resolve behind my eyes. He couldn't know that every lesson, every new skill I acquired, was another stone in the foundation of the reckoning that was to come. I was ready. The time for passive learning was over. I waited for a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a day when I knew Clara and David would be swamped at work and Leo would be at soccer practice. The house was mine, the silence a comforting blanket for the nerve-wracking task ahead. I sat at the kitchen table with my tablet. A cup of chamomile tea steamed beside me, though I knew it would do little to calm the frantic fluttering in my chest. My hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I opened the web browser. I typed the URL for the email provider. The login page appeared. I took a deep breath and typed in the address David had created: acroft@archiveemail.com. Then I moved the cursor to the password field. For a moment, I considered typing in the hateful phrase from the sticky note. Useless. Old hag 1. I imagined the system granting me access, the cruel joke becoming my key. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. I wouldn't let his contempt be the tool of my victory. I would use my own knowledge, the skills Leo had so patiently taught me. My eyes found the small blue link beneath the login button, a link I had clicked a dozen times on dummy accounts, but this time it was real. Forgot password? My finger hovered over the link. This was the point of no return. The moment I clicked this, a notification might be sent. David might know. But I also knew from my lessons with Leo that such notifications often went to a recovery email. What recovery information would he have used? He was far too arrogant to use his own. That would create a link. He would have set it up with no recovery options or a circular, untraceable one. So certain was he that no one would ever try to get in. It was a gamble. I tapped the screen. The next page asked how I wanted to reset my password. As I had suspected, there were no recovery emails or phone numbers listed. There was only one option: answer your security questions. My heart sank. I didn't know the answers. David would have chosen things only he knew. But then I saw the questions he had selected, and I almost laughed out loud. His arrogance, His utter lazy contempt for me was once again his undoing. Question 1. What is your mother's maiden name? He had used my mother's name. A piece of my life he had repurposed for his deception. I typed in Thompson. Question 2. What was the name of your first pet? He had chosen his first pet, a dog named Buddy, a story he had told at countless family dinners. He was so self-absorbed, he hadn't even bothered to invent new answers. I typed in Buddy. Question 3. In what city were you born? My city, not his. He had used my own personal information, weaving the truth of my life into the fabric of his lies. I typed in Philadelphia. I hit submit. For a heart-stopping second, the screen showed a loading icon, a small spinning circle that held my future in its digital rotation. And then the screen changed. Create a new password. A wave of relief so powerful it left me breathless washed over me. I had done it. I was in. I typed in my new password, one of my own choosing. Justice, for Richard 48. Strong, secure, and deeply personal. The system accepted it. And then the archive opened before me. It was no longer an abstract concept. It was a reality. A stark list of digital correspondence on the glowing screen. The inbox was filled with dozens of emails. My bookkeeper's eyes scanned the subject lines, and the blood in my veins ran cold. Ari, Project Nightingale final invoice. FWD, Cayman transfer confirmation. Urgent, consulting fee adjustment. Q3 reroute shipment 7B, revised bill of lading. It was all there, a lexicon of corporate fraud spelled out in plain, terrifying English. The numbers in the attached invoices were staggering, far beyond anything I could have imagined. This wasn't just skimming off the top. This was a systematic, sophisticated, multi-million-dollar deception. And my name, my good name, was attached to all of it. I closed my eyes for a moment, the enormity of what I had found pressing down on me. I had opened the door to their secret world. Now, it was time to meticulously document every single piece of incriminating evidence it contained. The initial shock quickly gave way to a cold, methodical calm. This was a world I understood. Not the technology, perhaps, but the content. The cryptic language, the doctored invoices, the hidden numbers. It was the dark mirror of the work I had done my entire life. I had spent 40 years making sure ledgers were balanced and accounts were transparent. Now I was faced with a set of books designed for the sole purpose of deception. My old instincts took over. My first step was to secure my position. I navigated to the account settings, my fingers now moving with a newfound confidence. I found the section for login notifications and security alerts. As I had suspected, David had disabled all of them. His arrogance was my shield. My next step was to create my own secure location for the evidence. Following the steps Leo had taught me, I created a brand new, completely anonymous email account under a fictitious name, Jane Thompson, a nod to my mother. I also created a new secure cloud drive, linking it to the Jane Thompson account. This would be my digital vault, my evidence locker. Then the real work began. I sat at my kitchen table for hours that first day, and for many days after, turning my quiet home into a silent command center. I approached the task with the same meticulous discipline I had once applied to year-end audits. I didn't just browse. I archived. One by one, I opened each incriminating email in the acroft.archive account. I read through the cryptic conversations, my mind automatically deciphering the coded language, consulting fees for shell corporations, project overages that corresponded with transfers to offshore accounts, shipment reroutes that involve phantom cargo and inflated insurance claims. For each email, I followed a strict 3-step procedure. First, I forwarded the original email to my Jane Thompson account. This created a copy with all the original header information intact: the sender, the recipient, the exact time and date. This was the digital equivalent of a notarized document. Second, I downloaded any attachments: the doctored invoices, the fake bills of lading, the falsified expense reports. My bookkeeper's eye for detail was invaluable. I could see where numbers had been altered, where signatures had been forged, where legitimate-looking documents had been created from whole cloth. Third, I uploaded these downloaded files to my secure cloud drive. I didn't just dump them in. I created a meticulous folder structure mirroring the one David had created. I created folders labeled Project Nightingale, Cayman Transfers, Invoice Fraud, and so on. Inside each folder, I placed the relevant documents, renaming each file with the date and a short description. 2022-4-112 Invoice 74B altered.pdf. 2022-1 Cayman Transfer confirmation.pdf. It was a perfect damning mirror of his crimes, organized with the precision of a lifelong professional. I left no trace. After each session, I cleared my browser history, deleted the downloaded files from my tablet's local storage, and logged out. The acroft.archive account remained exactly as David had left it, a sleeping dragon of evidence, completely unaware that its fire was being systematically siphoned away. Days turned into weeks. Every few afternoons, I would log in and repeat the process. More emails would have arrived, more threads in the tapestry of their fraud. And I would carefully, patiently, archive every single one. I was no longer just Agnes Croft, the retired grandmother. I was a digital archivist, a silent historian of their downfall. As spring warmed into early summer, David's arrogance metastasized. His success, built on the rickety scaffolding of his fraud, had filled him with a foolish sense of invincibility. The jokes at my expense became a constant refrain. The most galling incident occurred during a small family barbecue in my backyard. David, holding a beer, was in a particularly smug mood. He had just closed a big deal, a deal I knew from the emails I'd archived just the day before was lubricated by a hefty illicit consulting fee funneled through my ghost account. He caught my eye as I was watering my petunias. "Hey, Agnes," he called out, his voice loud enough for Clara and Leo to hear. "How's the archiving going? Keeping all those important emails safe for me?" I simply nodded, giving him a vague, pleasant smile. He turned to Leo, who was sitting on the porch steps, looking uncomfortable. "Your grandmother is my secret weapon at work, Leo," David said with a wink. "The most secure data vault in the world. No hacker would ever think to look in the email account of a woman who still thinks logging on involves putting wood in the fireplace." He roared with laughter at his own joke. Clara managed a weak, pained smile. Leo just stared at his father, then looked at me, a question in his eyes. I gave him a small, almost imperceptible shake of my head. Not yet. The insult didn't sting anymore. It was just data. It was another piece of evidence, not of my incompetence, but of his hubris. His arrogance was not just a character flaw. It was a tactical error. And then, one Thursday evening, I heard the back door slam. I was in my sewing room, mending a tear in one of Leo's old quilts. It was a peaceful, analog task that helped quiet my mind. The window was open, and I heard Clara's car pull into the driveway, much earlier than usual. A moment later, the back door slammed shut with a force that rattled the window pane. Her footsteps were frantic thuds on the hardwood floor. "David! David, are you here? We need to talk. Now!" I put down my needle and thread, my entire body going still. I crept to the door of my sewing room and opened it just a crack, giving me a clear line of sound to the kitchen. David must have been home already, for his voice answered hers, low and irritated. "What is it, Clara? I'm in the middle of a call." "Hang up," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Just hang up the phone. This is more important." I heard the muffled sound of David ending his call, followed by a heavy sigh. "This had better be good. What's wrong with you?" "They've hired a new CFO," Clara said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's from outside the company. A real hard ass, they're saying. And he's launching a full top-to-bottom internal audit of all departments, all accounts, going back 3 years. The silence that followed was heavy and profound. "So?" David finally said, but the usual confident swagger was gone. He was trying to sound dismissive, but I could hear the undercurrent of unease. "Let them audit. We're clean. Everything is perfectly documented." "Documented where, David?" Clara's voice rose, bordering on hysteria. "In a fake archive under my mother's name? What happens when they see millions of dollars in consulting fees being paid out of an account that's supposed to be for old client emails? What happens when they ask to speak to the owner of the account? What do we do then? Prop Mom up in a chair and hope for the best?" "Calm down," David hissed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "You're overreacting. It's an internal audit, not the FBI. They're looking for sloppy accounting, not a sophisticated corporate structure. It's all buried deep in the ghost account. No one can touch it. No one even knows how to look for it. Ghost account." The phrase sent a chill down my spine. That's what he called it. That's what he called me. An invisible, non-existent entity whose name was just a cover for his crimes. "What if they do, David?" Clara was crying now, her voice thick with sobs. "What if they find it? We could lose everything. Our jobs, the house, everything." "They won't find it," David said, his voice regaining some of its familiar, arrogant steel. "Because the person whose name is on it can't even work a computer. Remember? It's the perfect cover. Now pull yourself together. You're falling apart over nothing." I heard his footsteps, and then the back door opened and closed again. He had gone outside, leaving her to her tears. I retreated from the door, my heart pounding. The crack in their facade had appeared. But the conversation had also introduced a chilling possibility. What if the emails, as damning as they were, weren't enough? David was slippery. I could imagine him in a boardroom, coolly explaining away the digital paper trail as a misunderstanding, a clerical error, or, most likely, a malicious attack on the part of a confused elderly woman. I needed something more. I needed his voice. I needed his arrogance, his contempt, his casual confession captured and preserved. My next lesson with Leo had a new, carefully crafted objective. "Leo, dear," I said as he was showing me a new photo editing app. "I was thinking about your grandfather. I have so many stories about him, about our life together. I worry I'll start to forget them as I get older." I saw his face soften. "Grandma, that's a great idea." "Is there a way?" I asked. "A way to record my voice on this tablet? So I can save the stories for you?" "Of course," he said, his smile bright. "There's a voice memo app that's super easy to use. Here, let me show you." He opened a simple app with a large red record button. "You just tap this to start," he explained, "and this to stop. The recordings save automatically." We practiced. I recorded myself telling a short, funny story about Richard and a disastrous fishing trip. The quality was surprisingly clear. It was perfect. The trap was set. All I needed was for the rat to walk into it. The opportunity came the following week. David stopped by on a Wednesday evening, an unusual time for him. He claimed he was there to drop off some financial documents for Clara to look over, but I knew the real reason. He was nervous. The audit was clearly weighing on him, and he was checking on his ghost account, making sure his silent, clueless accomplice was still playing her part. He found me in the living room, reading a book. "Agnes, everything okay?" he asked, his attempted nonchalance failing miserably. "Perfectly fine, David," I replied, looking up over my reading glasses. "Just enjoying a quiet evening." My tablet was sitting on the end table next to my armchair, exactly as I had planned. It was partially obscured by a stack of magazines, its dark screen inert and unassuming. But it wasn't off. It was on, with the voice memo app open, waiting. David's phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID, and a look of annoyance crossed his face. "I have to take this," he muttered, turning his back to me and walking toward the large bay window, seeking the illusion of privacy. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. My hand trembled as I reached for the tablet, my fingers fumbling behind the magazines. With a silent prayer, I tapped the screen where I knew the big red button was. A tiny red light, almost invisible in the dimming evening light, began to pulse on the screen. It was recording. David's voice was low, a venomous whisper. "What?" "No. I told you not to call me on this line. I don't care. Listen to me. The audit is a nothing burger. Just stick to the story. The payments were for legitimate overseas consulting. Of course, there's no record of the consultants. That's the whole point. They're ghosts, just like the archive account they're paid from." He paused, listening. "Yes, the old lady's account. It's perfect, untraceable. If anyone ever finds it, we just play dumb. Blame it on a hacker, or better yet, on her. She's half senile anyway. No one would ever believe she wasn't either a victim or a willing accomplice who forgot she was involved. She's the perfect firewall." He listened for another moment, then let out a short, ugly laugh. "Relax. I've got everything under control. The useless old woman is going to make us very, very rich." He ended the call and turned back to me, his charming mask sliding back into place. "Sorry about that. Work stuff." "No bother at all, dear," I said, my voice miraculously steady. He left a few minutes later, completely oblivious. As soon as I heard his car pull away, I reached for the tablet, my hand shaking uncontrollably now. I stopped the recording. There it was, a 3-minute audio file. I named it Firewall M4A. I played it back, his voice clear as day, filling the silent room, spilling his crimes, his contempt, and his entire strategy onto the record. It was the final, irrefutable piece of the puzzle. The audit, which had been a source of such panic for Clara, came and went. David's scheme was too well hidden. For a few weeks, a tense calm settled. David's arrogance returned, more potent than ever. They believed they had weathered the storm. They had mistaken a single wave for the tsunami. The news broke not through a panicked phone call, but on the evening news. I was sitting in my living room when a familiar glass and steel building appeared on the screen, the headquarters of Ethel Logistics. "Developing story tonight," the news anchor said, her voice grave. "Federal investigators have launched a major probe into one of the state's largest logistics firms. Sources say the investigation centers on allegations of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar fraud scheme involving shell corporations and offshore accounts." My teacup rattled in its saucer. It was happening. My phone rang, shattering the silence. It was Clara. I let it ring 3 times before answering. "Hello? Mom, are you watching the news?" Her voice was a high, panicked squeal. "The feds are here, Mom. They're tearing the place apart. They're interviewing everyone. David is locked in a meeting with the board." Oh my God, what are we going to do? "Well, I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding, Clara," I said, my voice a calm counterpoint to her hysteria. "You and David haven't done anything wrong, have you?" The question hung in the air. Of course not. She finally sputtered, but her denial was weak, unconvincing even to her own ears. David called later that evening. His voice was tight, but not with fear, with anger. "Agnes," he snapped, dispensing with pleasantries. "Listen to me. This is nothing. It's a fishing expedition. The ghost account is completely firewalled. They will never find it. But if, and I mean if, by some 1 in a billion chance anyone ever asks you about that email account, you know nothing. You're a confused old woman who barely knows how to turn on a light switch. Do you understand me?" I think so, David," I stammered, playing my part to the very end. He hung up. He was so certain of his shield. He had no idea the knock on my door was next. 2 days later, it happened. I'd been expecting it, yet the sound still sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. It wasn't a friendly tap, but a firm, authoritative rap on my front door. I was in the kitchen. I took a moment to smooth my apron, to calm the frantic beating of my heart. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. 2 figures, a man and a woman, both dressed in impeccably tailored, sober, dark suits. They held an air of quiet, unshakable authority. I opened the door. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying just the right amount of grandmotherly befuddlement. The woman, who had sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing, held up a badge. "Ma'am, my name is Special Agent Shaw, and this is Special Agent Kenzie. We're with the FBI. Are you Agnes Croft?" "Yes, I am," I said, my hand fluttering to my chest. "Goodness me, the FBI? We'd like to ask you a few questions, if you don't mind," Agent Kenzie said, his voice polite but firm. "It's in regards to an ongoing investigation into Ethel Logistics." As if on cue, a car pulled into my driveway. It was Clara and David. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't part of my plan. "We took the liberty of asking your daughter and son-in-law to be present," Agent Shaw explained, her sharp eyes watching my reaction. "As Mr. David is a key executive at the company, we felt his presence would be helpful." Helpful. I understood immediately. This wasn't just a preliminary interview. This was a confrontation. They had already connected the dots. They had traced the digital breadcrumbs back to this house, to me. And now, they were here to see who would flinch first. I ushered them all into my living room, the same room where David had made his incriminating phone call. The air was thick with tension. Clara was pale as a sheet, her eyes wide with terror. David had composed his face into a mask of concerned cooperation. He was playing the part of the helpful executive, eager to assist. The investigators sat on my floral sofa. Clara and David sat in the 2 armchairs opposite them. I remained standing, a frail-looking old woman in an apron, hovering near the fireplace. Agent Shaw began. "Mrs. Croft, our forensic accounting team has uncovered a series of highly irregular transactions originating from Ethel Logistics. These transactions, totaling over $8 million, were funneled through a network of shell corporations and ultimately paid out from a single primary email account." She paused, letting the weight of the number hang in the air. Clara made a small, choking sound. "That email account," Agent Shaw continued, her eyes locking onto mine, "is acroft@archiveomail.com. It is registered in your name, at this address, and was set up from an IP address that traces back to this house. Can you tell us about that, Mrs. Croft?" The moment had arrived. All the planning, all the secret lessons, all the meticulous archiving had led to this single, pivotal question. Before I could even open my mouth, David shot to his feet. He was a consummate performer, and he had clearly been rehearsing this role. "My God," he breathed, his voice a perfect blend of horror and dawning realization. He turned to the investigators, his hands outstretched. "Agents, There has to be a terrible mistake. Agnes? My mother-in-law? He let out a short, incredulous laugh. With all due respect, she wouldn't know an email from a postage stamp. He walked over to me and placed a proprietary hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to look protective but felt like a brand. We set that account up for her a while ago, just so she could save recipes, you know. The fact that criminals could have targeted her, could have hacked her account to perpetrate something like this. It's sickening. She's a wonderful woman, but she is from a different generation. She's the victim here, agents, 100%. It was a brilliant performance. In a single speech, he had painted a complete, compelling, and utterly false narrative. He had cast me as the clueless, incompetent victim. He had thrown me directly and mercilessly under the bus. Agent Shaw's gaze shifted from David to Clara. Mrs. David, is this your understanding of the situation as well? Clara, who looked like she was about to faint, could only nod numbly. Her face was ashen. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible. My mother. She gets confused. She couldn't. Her betrayal, quieter than her husband's, was no less absolute. She had chosen him. David, emboldened, pressed his advantage. Look, we want to help in any way we can. We want to find the monsters who did this, who used an innocent old woman to cover their tracks, just as much as you do. He was magnificent, a snake, charming and deadly. He was leveraging the very stereotype he had so carefully cultivated for me, the useless old woman, the perfect scapegoat. He looked at me, a flicker of triumph in his eyes. He thought he had won. The investigators listened without expression. Finally, Agent Shaw turned her full attention back to me, dismissing David as one might dismiss a buzzing fly. Mrs. Croft, she said, her voice softer but no less steely. Your son-in-law has offered one explanation, but these are very serious allegations, and the evidence has led us to your doorstep. We need to hear it from you. We need to know who is responsible for the activity on this account. This was it. They were all waiting for the useless old woman to play her part. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I gently shrugged David's hand off my shoulder, a small gesture of emancipation that made him flinch. I straightened my back. The frail, grandmotherly facade I had so carefully constructed dissolved. The quiet, unshakable confidence of a professional bookkeeper who has all her numbers in order rose to the surface. My voice, when I spoke, was not the reedy whisper they were used to. It was clear, calm, and resonated with a strength they had never heard before. I am the owner of that email account, I stated simply. A wave of profound relief washed over David's face. He thought I was confessing, cementing my status as the clueless victim. He even managed a small, sad smile, a look that said, "See? She doesn't even know what she's admitting to." Clara let out a small, choked sob, burying her face in her hands. Let me be perfectly clear, I said, my gaze sweeping from the agents to my daughter and finally landing on my son-in-law. I am the owner of the account. I'm the only person who has had access to it for the past 6 months, and I know everything that has gone on in it. The relief on David's face curdled, replaced by a dawning, horrified confusion. This was not in his script. The useless old woman was not following her lines. However, I continued, I'm not the perpetrator of the fraud, but I do know who is. I turned away from my speechless family and walked over to the small antique writing desk in the corner. From the top drawer, I retrieved my purse. My movements were unhurried, my hands perfectly steady. I unclasped the purse and took out a small black object, a simple USB flash drive. I walked back to the center of the room and held it out to Agent Shaw. On this drive, I said, my voice as precise and clinical as if I were delivering a year-end financial report, you will find a complete and meticulously organized record of the fraud perpetrated by my son-in-law, David, with the complicity of my daughter, Clara." "What?" David sputtered, a sound of pure, panicked disbelief. "That's insane. She's confused. She doesn't know what she's saying." Agent Shaw ignored him. She took the USB drive from me, her sharp eyes studying my face, a flicker of what looked like grudging respect in their depths. I continued my presentation. The drive contains several folders. In the first, you will find every fraudulent email sent to or from the Acroft Archive account, forwarded with their original time-stamped headers intact. In the second folder, you will find the corresponding doctored invoices, falsified bills of lading, and forged expense reports. I've also taken the liberty of cross-referencing them in a separate spreadsheet, highlighting the specific discrepancies and the corresponding illegal fund transfers to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Clara was now staring at me, her face a mask of utter, uncomprehending horror. It was as if she were seeing me for the first time. "And finally," I said, delivering the killing blow, "in the third folder, you will find an audio file. It is a recording of a phone call made by Mr. David in this very room, in which he details the cover-up, his use of the ghost account, and his strategy of using his useless half-senile mother-in-law as a perfect firewall in case of discovery. I believe you'll find it all quite organized." Agent Kenzie took the drive from his partner. He pulled a laptop from his briefcase, inserted the drive, and began to navigate its contents. The room was deathly quiet. I watched David's face. The charming, confident mask had not just cracked, it had disintegrated. His skin was the color of wet cement, his eyes wide and darting, a trapped animal looking for an escape that wasn't there. He was looking at me, the frail old woman he had mocked, and seeing not a victim, but his executioner. Agent Q. His face was grim. He turned the laptop screen toward his partner. She watched for a moment, then nodded once. The silent professional exchange was more damning than any shout could have been. Agent Shaw stood up, her gaze fixed on David, who seemed to have shrunk into his expensive suit. "Mark David," she said, her voice cold and formal. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." She then turned to my daughter, whose face had crumpled. "Clara David, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud and obstruction of justice." The world slowed down. The clicking of handcuffs, the recitation of their rights, the stunned, silent tears rolling down Clara's face. David didn't protest. He didn't speak. All the bluster, all the arrogant charm had been stripped away, leaving a hollow, defeated shell. As they were led out of my home, Clara looked back at me one last time, her eyes asking a question I could not answer. A question filled with a lifetime of regret. I simply met her gaze, my own face a mask of sorrowful resolve. The weeks that followed were a blur. The evidence I had provided was ironclad. Faced with the irrefutable digital paper trail and the sound of his own voice, David had no choice but to cooperate. He and Clara lost everything. Their plea deal required them to forfeit all assets deemed to be the proceeds of their crimes: their house, their cars, their savings. They lost their jobs, their names splashed across the news in a humiliating spectacle. David received a hefty prison sentence. Clara, due to her lesser role, received a lighter sentence, but her life, as she knew it, was over. The only person I saw was Leo. His parents' downfall had devastated him, but he was a resilient boy with a core of integrity they had somehow failed to corrupt. He moved in with me, his quiet presence filling the lonely halls of the house. One sunny afternoon, a few months later, Leo and I were in the garden. I was teaching him how to prune the roses, a skill Richard had taught me. You know, Leo said suddenly, not looking at me, his focus intent on a stubborn branch. I always knew you were smart, Grandma. Dad, he was just too arrogant to see it. I stopped my work and looked at my grandson. He was a good boy, a good man in the making. The family's true honor, the legacy of decency and hard work that Richard and I had tried to build, was safe with him. Your father saw what he wanted to see, Leo, I said softly. People who underestimate you don't define who you are. They simply reveal who they are. They had mistaken my quietness for weakness, my age for incompetence. They had built a cage for me out of their contempt, never realizing I was the one who held the key. They had lost more than their jobs and their money. They had lost their family, their integrity, and their future, all because they laughed at a woman they called useless. I snipped a final, withered rose from its stem, letting it fall to the earth. The reckoning was complete. It was time to balance the books. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here,